Internment, the state of being confined as a prisoner, especially for political or military reasons. We must look for opportunity, not look for a scapegoat. We must not judge based on what others have done. We must not look at the race, gender, or nationality. We must look at the heart and soul of the person at hand. Picture this. It's early morning. It's quiet. It's Sunday. It's December of 1941 at Pearl Harbor. All of a sudden, bombs drop, machine guns blare. The Japanese are attacking. A tragedy. We are at war with Japan. The timeline from Pearl Harbor to internment happened very quickly. By Valentine's Day in 1942, just a couple months after Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant General John I. DeWitt, who was head of the Western Defense Command, recommended moving the Japanese from the West Coast. Only 5 days later, the President signed an executive order authorizing areas from which people may be excluded without trial or hearing. The order did not say a specific group, but it was only applied to the Japanese. By March 1st, DeWitt began to remove Japanese from Washington, California, Oregon, and Arizona. It did not matter what their citizen status was. By March 22nd, just 3.5 months later, people were already being interned. The executive order that President Franklin signed was called Executive Order 9066, and it sent away any and all people of Japanese ancestry to relocation camps until further notice. Almost instantaneously, over 100,000 Japanese Americans were shipped to internment camps across America. However, most relocation camps were in California and desert areas. Japanese Americans were given 6 days to dispose of their belongings other than what they could carry on their back. Japanese Americans were taken to relocation centers and eventually taken to internment camps, which would be their home for years to come. 62% of these internees were even American citizens. The first internment camp in operation was Manzanar, located in Southern California. Camps would open in Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Arkansas. Although only 10 camps would be used, they housed over 100,000 Japanese Americans. It has been proven that these camps were created mostly because of racism more than security reasons. The Army needed to find a justified reason to intern more than 100,000 Japanese Americans. The Army settled on the Ni-Hao incident as their reasoning. The Ni-Hao incident occurred in December of 1941. Just after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, 3 Japanese Americans on the Hawaiian island of Ni-Hao assisted a Japanese pilot, Nishigori Nakasaki, who crashed there. Despite the incident, the territorial government of Hawaii rejected calls for the mass internment of Japanese Americans living there. Japanese Americans were crammed into small one-bedroom apartments with a heater stove to keep warm. The living conditions were tragic, Secretary of Interior Harold L. Ikes wrote. The situation in at least some of the Japanese American internment camps is bad and is becoming worse rapidly. The families had to make do and try to band together to create a sense of community by making a school or a church, anything that could make the homes feel more homey. Some people lost their lives in the camps. A fisherman and a farmer, Hiroa Ishimura and Toshiro Kabata, were shot in New Mexico. The 2 men had been too ill to walk from the train station to the camp, but the guards thought they were trying to escape. Ishiro Shimada was a gardener from Los Angeles who was known to be mentally ill and attempted suicide at least twice in the camp. He was shot and killed trying to escape an Oklahoma camp on May 13, 1942. 3 days later, an internee, Hijoki Tashaki, was a camp was in a camp in California. While he was collecting scrap lumber in 1943, James Hatsuki Wasaka, a 63-year-old man, was shot by a guard. The guard was court-martialed but found not guilty. In 1944, Shihiro James Okamada was shot by a guard. The guard, Bernard Joad, was fined $1 for unauthorized use of government property. That property was a bullet. Eventually, Japanese Americans were allowed to return to their home, but usually there was nothing left. They would return to find their houses ransacked, destroyed, or simply gone. The family living conditions were not the only thing that changed. Internment affected the family culture. Family roles were changed and women had changed because men in internment camps could no longer work. Division of labor based on gender changed. Marriage and having children were delayed because families were separated. Women's home care duties were lessened because families lived in smaller spaces. Internment caused terrible family upheaval in some ways, but benefited women, ultimately giving them more independence. If there is any triumph from this tragedy, it is the growth and opportunity for Asian American women. Unfortunately, that independence came because they were separated from their male loved ones. German and Italian citizens were also deemed enemy aliens. Some were relocated or their property was taken. Unlike the 100,000 plus Japanese Americans, only a few hundred Italians were interned. Joanne Sheedy, who works for the U.S. Department, says, "What happened to the Italians was based on wartime hysteria. We are trying to educate people so it won't happen again. Italian fishing boats were seized and thousands lost their jobs." The full story has never been made public, while at the same time 500,000 Italians were serving in the armed forces. They were the largest ethnic group fighting in the war. Their language was considered disgraceful, and many children and grandchildren were not taught to speak it. June 6, 1944 is D-Day, which turns the war in the United States' favor in Europe. By December of the same year, President Roosevelt will have to rescind Executive Order 9066 after the Supreme Court finds the camps unlawful. It will take until October 30th, 1946 for the final release of all Japanese Americans. In 1948, President Truman signed the Evacuation Claims Act, which allowed those interned to sue the government for their losses. In 1988, President Reagan formally apologized and provided each internment survivor with $20,000 in restitutions. This costed the government $1.6 million. There are tragedies throughout history, but this might be America's biggest one. Our own country interned its own citizens based on their race, although there was one triumph that came out of this, and that is we won the war. But at what cost? Could we have won this war without committing this tragedy? We interned our own citizens simply because of their race. They were subjected to harsh living conditions, and it can be argued that internment didn't even make us any safer. America is supposed to be the land of the free, where people feel safe and everyone, no matter their race, gender, or nationality, has rights. We took away people's rights and imprisoned them because of their national background, the language they spoke, and in fact they looked like the people that we were at war with. America's biggest triumph would be that we take lessons learned from Japanese American internment during World War II and rise above our own prejudices when frightened by those who are different from us.